everybody is seated, we can start with the next session. We have listened with a lot of interest about all the infrastructure projects that's going on and all the good things that we can expect. We've read the National Development Plan, and there's a whole lot of work in there. So we thought it a good opportunity to get somebody that is an expert on project control, project management rather, and we are honored to have Willem Louw here. Willem is a long-time SAIIE person where he's been involved in a lot of infrastructure projects. He's also involved in the acquisitions that SAIIE did locally and overseas. So as a civil engineer, he is, I think, one of the best people to talk about major infrastructure projects. And presently, Willem is with the Stellenbosch Business School, and he's working towards his PhD. And he's also the chairperson of the Council of the University of the Free State, the one across the water here. So Willem, welcome, and we're looking forward to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Dr. van Tonder, for the introduction. Normally in a situation like this, it's the easiest way to start by saying all protocol observed. But however, one does not often get the opportunity to do a presentation in front of a premier. So with due respect and with acknowledging the presence of the Premier, thank you for being here this morning. Dr. van Tonder, you said expert. My definition of expert is in two pieces. The X is a has-been, and the spurt is a drip under pressure. So I take it where it comes from. It also comes with a bit of scars and broken T-shirts or torn T-shirts and stuff that come along with that. In terms of making use of the opportunity, I just thought from an interest perspective is let's use it or lose it. If you don't make an impression first time, you're not going to get a second chance. However, I'd like to do two things with your indulgement. As per the title of the talk, you saw that it's the role of the executive sponsor in a mega project success. For the sake of necessity, I'm going to reverse the process. I'm going to start somewhere around the middle and speak about the mega project and then deal with success and lastly come to the executive sponsor, whatever he or she is and may look like. And then secondly, I often get asked the question now, why after 25 years in industry and going on early retirement have you embarked on a PhD? I currently do not know why. Other than having a distinct hunch or a feel and some intuition that plays into that, and secondly to deal with the fact that I'm inquisitive. I'd like to know why and what, where now. And I've through the appropriate pain and the reflection with study leaders, have also gotten to the point that you don't have standing, you don't have justification if you only come with your industry experience and say, I think this is what it's going to be like. They want to know why, and I've also found that it's a necessity. If you want to go and talk to someone, yes, you can go so far with your experience. As part of the game, you're going to add some fundamental empirical proof to what it is that you're saying. So I said I'd start with more like the back end in mind, and let's talk for a moment about a mega project. This is the definition as extracted from someone by the name of Ben Fleifberg, who has got significant standing within the project management field, so much so that currently he's the head of mega project management at the SAIIE School of Business as part of Oxford University. Now, Bent has been there, Bent has done, but along with him is also an individual with the name of Ed Merrow, someone who's in charge of an organization called Independent Project Analysis, or IPA, that does benchmarking world over, particularly on capital investments, and particularly on capital investments greater than $1 billion. Now, Ed started in his days as an employee of the Rand Corporation, already playing around with benchmarking, and came to the conclusion, with enough evidence available, that typically these projects, when it comes to the $1 billion mark and they start going wrong, they go wrong in a big way. They go significantly wronger than what otherwise would have happened if it was only $100 million. Now, the unnerving part of this is you now start having a conversation with someone on something that is indicated to cost 1 with 12 zeros or more. Because you're not talking, this is 1 with 9 zeros. We're entering into a space in the world, and in fact the entry's gone beyond entry, as to how large. I've said a mega project in its definition has got the word large. Let's just consider for the moment the size of the US debt to China, and it's just over $1 trillion. Now, that's 1,000 of those mega projects. It's $1 billion times 1,000. And now we're in the 12 zeros mark. In fact, an update of that debt is 1.15 as in June 2017. Now, hopefully and most likely you'll agree that if this amount of money is not managed prudently, it can have quite a significant impact on the world economy. If saying that, and taking the relevance one step further, we've got 2 of the largest current mega projects in the world, equating to a number which is more than 50% of the US debt to China. The first one is the Joint Strike Fighter Aircraft Program, and that's a replacement of 2,465 aircraft for all 3 services in the US: the Air Force, the Marine Corps, and the Navy. And that number in this 50% or more of US debt to China is $400+ billion. That's getting close to 1/2. The other significant percentage in the current mega projects at the moment is China's high-speed rail project. And just for interest's sake, it's a decade old. It's now one of the biggest infrastructure projects in history. The Chinese government spent about $360 billion building 22,000 kilometers of high-speed rail lines in 10 years. Then they had an accident in 2011. And in order to deal with the accident, they decided to reduce the speed of the high-speed trains from 350 to 300 kilometers per hour. They've gotten over that hump, and they're now intending to spend 500+ in doing the rest of the rail network, which will give them, by 2020, a network that stretches 30,000 kilometers in China of trains running at speed anything up to 350 kilometers an hour. The point I'm trying to make is, if you don't manage those two projects wrong, or if you manage them wrong and you don't do what you're supposed to do in terms of prudence, you're going to have the same kind of effect as not managing the debt of the US to China. It's not a presentation to try and bamboozle you with numbers, but it's trying to give an indication, and I am going to come back home in order to just reflect on what it is that we've got in the South African environment. The Economist in June 2008 spoke to infrastructure spend in emerging economies for the period 2009 to 2018 as 2.2 trillion. And this is the type of infrastructure that typically comes to mind when the term infrastructure is used. A rail, a road, a dam, a building of sorts. Not necessarily the industrial or manufacturing application. Those numbers aren't in there. Those numbers are in the last number. And I'm going to skip the one because it's just an additional enhancement on where it starts from. Flightberg, as well as PwC, as recently in August of 2017, estimates that by 2025, we're going to have anything between 6 and 9 trillion combined in the world on infrastructure spend. Once again, inside of that is going to be a significant number of activities that have the big ticket numbers connected to it. $500 billion is not a number that seems to frighten anybody anymore. Manage them wrong, a lot of other dominoes fall thereafter in terms of the impact. Why are these mega projects so attractive to decision makers? And again, Flightberg says it's all about sublimes. And he raises 4 of them. He says there's a technological sublime, which is the rapture that engineers and technologists experience from pushing technology boundaries. Then there's a political sublime. It's the rapture that politicians experience from building monuments to themselves and their causes. There's an economic sublime. It's the delight that financiers and business people experience when it goes right in making a lot of money, much more than what normally is the case. And then there's an aesthetic sublime. It's the pleasure that designers and those that appreciate good design get from something that's both very large and iconically very beautiful. Below, in very small letters, I've got characteristics of mega projects that are often overlooked. This is the good stuff. This is the honeymoon experience when these sublimes are put on the table. And Premier, you earlier this morning said the Gautrain, and I'm sure within this there's a number of sublimes. Mr. Shilowa in particularly, I would think is rather pleased and chuffed with the fact that the Gautrain is doing what it's doing. But inside of that space, we forget that there are a few very important things that we need to take care of. And I'm just going to raise two. And there's no time and no place in this presentation to deal with all 10. But two of them is, there's something called optimism bias. Optimism bias in terms of when a number hits the press for the first time. It's firm, it's fixed in the minds of others out there. Apologies to and feeling sorry for the project manager or the project director in terms of putting that number on the table and then being held to something that is still so vague because it's up early, it's a tough job to deal with. You need to manage a number that is based on a certain level of definition, and you don't know yet of what the macro impacts are going to be. I said in the definition up front, it's of long duration. Go and ask those that have played around in the mega project space just in South Africa. Anything between 12 to 15 years. From there's a inkling or there's a concept, and then taking it forward so that you can have implementation thereafter. Spoke to the sponsor of the NMP pipeline, which is the pipeline between Durban and Heidelberg, and got the same as part of an interview, and got the same kind of message. That pipeline was already in the minds of others by 2001, 2002. It is just about finished, just about. So you got 15, 16 years from conceptualization or thinking about it to putting it in there. And if you don't deal with it appropriately within that period of time and make provision for what potentially can still come, and that's one of the other reasons. You've heard about the reference to a black swan. Black swans often have a nasty habit of creeping up on these mega projects of that long duration. And again, back to the pipeline. 2003, 2008, those 5 years were white hot in the world in terms of the economy. You could just about get anything for any price. And then we fell over the cliff in 2009, 2010, slap bang in the middle of the pipeline, whilst negotiations were continuing. And it's a weird world out there in terms of contracting. You get promised the sun, the moon, and the earth by the contracting fraternity. And when the tide turns, then it's your turn to then put the screws on and extract as much as you can from the contractors. This up and down thing has killed many of these projects that lie out there. How successful are mega projects globally? Just about all and every author that you pick up or any reference in literature speaks to dismal performance in terms of costs. Be it overruns, be it schedule delays, and be it not delivering to business benefits. And I'll get back to why the inclusion of business benefits in this conversation. Flyvberg, in all the work that he's done up to now, and his world consists mainly in terms of reflecting on mega projects, typically the infrastructure, public sector type work. Lots of data gathered from building of railway lines, lots of data gathered from building of roads. And 9 out of 10 of those projects inside of the space that he's dealt with, and it repeats itself. Either suffer a cost overrun, or they suffer a schedule delay, or they don't promise their benefits, their business benefits, as they should have. Mero, to a lesser extent, picks up failure in terms of 65 out of every 100 mega projects experience a cost overrun or a schedule delay or benefit shortfalls. Now, in terms of Flyvberg's way of measuring, Flyvberg says when a project's on target for all 3 dimensions, it's successful. If you miss any of those 3 dimensions, then it's considered to be a failure, and that's why it is so high in terms of 9 out of 10 are failures. Mero, on the other hand, goes and speaks to thresholds. He says, I'll give you on your costs, approved, on your cost sanctions, I'll give you 25%. If you're still within that range, we'll consider your cost to be successful. Same as in execution with regards to the schedule that is on the table that you promise to the board or promise to whichever authority is that you asked for sanction. But he says if you're within 25% of that, I'll give you credit as being successful. And speaking typically to industrial type projects, there's a startup that happens once the plant or the facility has been declared ready for operation. And he says if you don't suffer a significant reduction in production into the first 2 years and come close to nameplate capacity, I'll give you that credit as well. Despite getting those credits out there as part of the evaluation, we still have 65 out of every 100 mega projects not being successful. Now we can continue this conversation for a significant period of time. Somewhere we have to establish a yardstick in terms of, is it fair? Is it real? Is it reasonable? There are opinions, and in fact there are quite a number of opinions that speak to, but it's not real, to couple success only to the 3 dimensions of the budget or cost, to time or the schedule, and to delivering against the business plan in terms of operating as it should. And they make a very strong case that success over time needs to be recognized in this debate on success or failure of projects. And a lot of that conversation relates back to what is the impact on the customer? What's the future potential that this mega project brings to the table? Why isn't that part of the debate? And I'll show you in the next slide why not. Typical examples that then get raised is, yeah, but look at the Sydney Opera House. It is currently one of the 7 new age wonders of the world. It runs full houses in terms of performances and has been doing it consistently for the last decade too. But if you go back to the design as proposed and the plan that was approved at the beginning of putting the Sydney Opera House in place, and anecdotally, by the way, the architect or the designer was a Dane called Jorn Utzon. It is said, urban legend, that they had such difficulty in deciding which of the designs needed to go forward, because this is the state of New South Wales. They put out the competition, they got the designers to submit their designs that at some stage they just gave up. And they took all the designs and they threw them up in the air. Those that landed on the table were continued with in terms of further evaluation, and those that fell off weren't. Utzon's one was one of those that stayed on the table. It could just as well have fallen off and not been considered further. Regardless of that, it cost 1,400% more than it was budgeted, and it was 10 years late. Now, who today remembers 1,400% budget increase, and who remembers 10 years late? Given the fact that it stands where it stands today. I'm not, Premier, going to take up the conversation now on the Gautrain. I think the jury's still out. There are a few cost issues that still need to be resolved, but I am going to have the opportunity to speak to Mr. van der Merwe. So we'll see what comes out of that debate. Why is this so difficult in terms of, if you don't put a yardstick in place, then dealing with success is quite a tricky exercise. Just look at this, what's on the screen at the moment. If you look at the top end, what do the shareholders or the sponsor or the owner look at in terms of time scale? They look at the end of the project plus years thereafter. At the bottom part of the slide, the project team and the users, they look at the end. The project is complete. It's chalk and cheese in terms of who evaluates what. The debate continues in terms of now what weight do you add on to the project team in terms of their measure of success versus what do you give us a weight in terms of increase of shareholder value and making profit for the owner. All these items are real, but it doesn't make for easy measurement. This academic debate is going to continue. It has been in the space sort of since 1987, but it's not complete yet. And the clamour is continuing, particularly because you have the likes of the Sydney Opera House plus a few others out there. And you can take Terminal 5 at Heathrow as well at the same time. Don't know who of you can remember, but Terminal 5 wasn't a magic example of startup. When Terminal 5 at Heathrow started up, there was a major calamity for a number of weeks in terms of luggage not being available. The system wasn't synchronized in terms of the facility that loads off and makes the luggage available to the passengers. That's not regarded, because if you walk into Terminal 5 today, it's a beautiful example of what a terminal should look like, and Dubai is going to be most likely the same thing. Let's get to the South African mega project landscape. What have I done? And I believe it's fair and reasonable. Just looked at the last 10 years and said, where was the US dollar to the rand in 2006? It was 71. And I think this morning it's 14, or it's back in that vicinity. So if on a straight line comparative basis, if you look at those two points in time, you get to some number that says mega project in the South African space, if it exceeds the range of 10 to 11 billion rand, then we classify as a mega project. And we'll consider to and continue to use that going forward. In that same period of time, since 2006 to say 2016, 2017, out of public domain information, and I may have skipped, or there may be others, but if you go and search and evaluate the South African context, these are typically what you're going to find. Because I have obviously a bit more knowledge than others may have in terms of what comes out of the SAIIE stable, and SAIIE being one of the, if not the major investor in the private sector when it comes to major capital spend. There are a selection of 3 SAIIE projects in there. There's an Anglo Platts and a Royal Bafokeng project in there. And for the rest, it's SOCs. It's the Eskoms, it's the Transnets, it's the Sunrolls, and it's the Gautrain Management Agency, as it's called today. Now, I've not gone to the trouble of trying to relate and reflect what has happened to these projects versus their budgets, versus their time, versus their promises that were made to boards or executive committees. You, at your own pace, can ask yourself a question in terms of what's in the public domain at the moment with regards to Medupi and Kusile regarding costs. Gautrain Ingula is a pumped storage scheme. Ladysmith Environment spoke about the new multi-product pipeline. There's GFIP, toll roads. It's got its own merry magic that goes along with it. And for the rest of it, primarily in the private sector. I also don't want to go into a public sector bashing exercise. It's not necessary. It's the point that one needs to make and think of in terms of these mega projects. And by the way, if you add those numbers together, I think you get to a range of between 480 to 500 billion rand. It's a $500 billion in the last 10 years in South Africa. And we haven't necessarily had our performance in terms of 9 out of 10 or 65 out of 100 is not better if that is used as the yardstick. So are we going to sit around and mope and gaze at our navels and try and analyze to death as to what are the real numbers, did it really go wrong, etc., etc.? It's not the appropriate thing to do right now. If you've got that story that in terms of cost overruns and schedule delays and delivering on the business case, they haven't delivered. And remember, granted again, it doesn't necessarily make provision for the time conversation. It doesn't take 10 years, future potential, additional jobs created, etc., etc. It speaks to what have you undertaken? And for some reason or other, which I don't really understand, it's as if it's like a wedding. You take the solemn oath, but then you forget about the fact that the oath is out there. You made a commitment. You, as whoever you are that supported the project, you went to an authorization authority and you said, please, can I have this amount of money? I'll give it to you at a given point in time, and I'll deliver the business case. We can't forget that. And it's necessary that we remind ourselves about that on a continuous basis. And Fleifberg has coined this thing as the iron law of mega projects. It's over budget, it's over time, it's under benefits, and it's over and over and over again. Now, there are some remedies. There are things that we can take care of. And inter alia, there's work done, because an evaluation was done out of the UK. And what did they use? They used the infrastructure that was put together for 2012 Olympic Games. They took Terminal 5, and there's currently a project on the train system in London, on the underground, called Crossrail. And those are all typical mega projects, and they're a reflection on it's about securing innovation and flexibility and making sure that the lessons that have been learned cognitively play a role. One of the innovation and flexibility dimensions that comes to play in the 2012 Olympic Games is it was complete a year before the time. It was finished a year ahead of when the Olympic Games in 2012 took place. That gave them a full year to practice, and they did that. Part of the thinking process that goes into innovation. There are authors that speak to stakeholder management. There are authors that speak to, out of the Norwegian environment, a quality assurance program. And there are authors that ask questions around privatization and how does that work as a cure for challenges posed by the mega project delivery. 5 rules for innovation. I've spoken to one of them. The third one was in the middle of this list, rehearsing first. There's a space here for Jack van der Merwe to have made comments. And this is good stuff. Jack makes the point after the Gautrain experience that in order to continue with transport infrastructure mega projects, not only in this country but also elsewhere, it's political will. It includes in the base case design those items that have been listed. It's funding, both infrastructure and operational funding, and it's an acceptance by the community and buy-in. Stop it. But we also find that there's a place for an entity called an executive sponsor. And accompanied by this executive sponsor is executive decision-making and the fact that there are a number of publications, of which the most important of those publications is done by PMI in conjunction with the Boston Consulting Group on engagement of the executive sponsor as the top driver. Mero says if you bring executive decision-making into play, and he's cynical and he's digging, he says, to be blunt, when it comes to the governance of large projects, most board members strike him as being brain dead. But it's real. Where did I get the stuff from on the executive sponsor? From national organizational standards, be it the PMI, be it IPMA, be it APM. and there's no one standard definition. It is, however, comprehensively recognized and agreed that such a person or a minute of, or a committee is crucial in terms of any mega project or any project, in fact, and it makes a significant contribution to success. This person has got these responsibilities. It's a senior person. It's predominantly leadership, ensuring effective governance, and structurally on the interface. Now, I'm not going to bother too much, just to show that in a generic sense, that's where a structure for a project sponsor can fit. That's where it in a program can fit. And if you use your imagination, you'll find an hourglass in there which speaks to the permanent organization being the business and the temporary organization being the project, with the relationship between the project sponsor and the project manager. Consistent theme: attributes, effectiveness, success. Effectiveness of the sponsor is the best predictor of project success, and the personal attributes. What are we going to do? We're going to analyze attributes of the sponsor. What is required? These are the things. It's a leadership position. It's not a management position. It's not a super project manager. There are tools that you can evaluate and pick up what are the attributes that an individual does have. I mentioned it's a leader. When you select, at the moment, there's not much available. Linda Byrne says the era of the accidental project manager has largely passed, but we're still in the age of the accidental sponsor. So where does this leave us? It's an imperative. The first item that decision makers on governance for mega projects in the South African context must deal with is the who, the when, the how of the executive sponsor. We need to formalize the process, and it's a boardroom and an executive committee discussion. It's not an accidental decision. I end off with the theme of this conference. It's up to the board or the executive committee for these projects that could have a distinct bearing on how well it goes in this country to take up the stewardship and deal with the selection of an individual appropriately. Thank you very much.